Opening the center's diagonal instantly creates pressure, preparing quick development and asserting immediate influence over key squares. Instantly challenging white's central pawn, this knight develops a piece and prepares for further expansion. Developing a knight to control central squares and prepare for castling builds a solid foundation. A bold commitment to fianchettoing, preparing for a kingside storm by developing the bishop to its longest diagonal. Asserting central presence, this pawn push immediately challenges black's fianchetto structure and prepares to seize territory. Developing the bishop to its most active diagonal solidifies the kingside while setting up potential counterplay against the center. Solidifying central influence, this knight prepares for a potential kingside attack while reinforcing pawn control. Securing the king in the Catalan setup is paramount. This frees up the rook and prepares for potential central pawn advances. Establishing central dominion with e4 now aims to control more space and prepare for potential pawn storms or piece activity. Solidifying the center with d6 offers black a robust pawn chain and prepares for kingside counterplay. Solidifying the center's pawn chain and preparing for kingside development, this move subtly enhances piece coordination. A bold pawn thrust, immediately contesting the center and opening diagonals for potential counterplay. Securing the king behind a pawn's wall solidifies white's central control. This develops the knight to a central square, challenging white's pawn structure and preparing to contest the d-file. Gaining space on the queen side, white intends to cage the black knight and potentially initiate a kingside pawn storm. Securing the knight's retreat allows for central pawn breaks later and prepares for potential counterplay on the queen side. Seizing queenside space, this gambit aims to disrupt black's central grip and open avenues for attack. The knight's journey to the edge creates intriguing attacking possibilities on the kingside, but sacrifices valuable central space. Exploiting the knight's misplaced sortie, white immediately fractures black's pawn chain to gain space and open attacking avenues. Shifting the knight to f4 opens attacking possibilities against white's kingside pawn structure, even if it looks a little exposed. Sacrificing the bishop opens lines and challenges black's central pawn blockade. Reclaiming the central pawn opens lines for your rooks, but be mindful of the weakened kingside. Securing the queen's rook on the open c-file is a proactive step towards dominating the queenside and potentially creating threats against black's king. Striking at the queenside flank, this aggressive thrust aims to unravel white's pawn structure and create attacking avenues. Liberating the c-file, this pawn thrust aims to dismantle black's kingside structure and open lines for the rooks. Reclaiming the center opens up the c-file for your rook and aims to disrupt white's pawn structure. Unlocking the queen and preparing for central pressure, while aiming to exploit the weakened kingside pawn structure. Opening the f-file offers active play, potentially targeting the weakened queenside pawn structure. Establishing a knight outpost on b5 creates immediate pressure, forcing black to address the potential invasion. Unleashing a pawn sacrifice, black disrupts white's central grip and seeks to pry open lines for their pieces. Unlocking the c-file with the bishop solidifies central control and prepares for potential d-pawn advances. Embracing the open diagonals, black seizes initiative, disrupting white's pawn structure and aiming for active piece play. The bishop recaptures, opening the c-file and preparing a potential knight outpost on d5. Injecting activity along the fourth rank, this maneuver seeks to disrupt white's queenside structure and potentially open lines for further counterplay. Challenging the rook on its advanced perch secures the c-file and prepares central pawn advances. Challenging the bishop pair with an active piece aims to disrupt white's central control and potentially create open lines for black's pieces. Unlocking the open c-file with this capture is paramount, clearing the path for aggressive rook play. Reclaiming central influence with a knight hop, this piece now eyes weak pawns and the kingside. Securing the now open c-file, this capture repositions the rook, challenging the bishop's control and opening avenues for further queenside pressure. The queen seeks active squares, eyeing the vulnerable kingside and potentially activating along the open, a file. Dislodging the strong piece controlling the open rank opens up white's own queenside, potentially creating weaknesses to exploit. A bold queen sacrifice is initiated, aiming to shatter white's central pawn structure and unleash attacking potential. Chasing away that active queen clears the path for your rook and centralizes the white queen for future action. This move, a seemingly passive retreat, aims to shield the king from the immediate threats and offers a breathing room to regroup the pieces. Reasserting central control, white now aims to penetrate on the king's flank and potentially pressure that exposed black monarch. A proactive defense, this pawn push seeks to create breathing room and potentially initiate a queenside counterplay. Reinforcing the pawn structure on the kingside, this move subtly aims to solidify white's defenses while preparing for potential pawn advances. The rook's activation on the 8th rank finally injects some life into black's position, probing for weaknesses. Reclaiming the open file solidifies central influence and prepares for potential pawn advances down the board. Bolstering the king's safety is paramount, as the rooks on the open files could soon become a threat. The knight's excursion to c7 disrupts the queenside pawns and creates immediate pressure. Relinquishing the c-file to white's rook creates enduring pressure, potentially opening avenues for attack. This repositioning of the rook creates a formidable battery, preparing to exploit the weak light squares surrounding black's king. Reactivating the queen's pressure along the 5th rank creates immediate irritation for white's reorganized pieces. The knight infiltrates the queenside, threatening to trap the rook and create new attacking avenues. Reorganizing for potential pawn pushes after the rook exchange, aiming to regroup the queen. Realigning the knight to a more flexible outpost after the material swap offers enhanced defensive and offensive potential. A bold attempt to activate the rook, seeking counterplay on the open file despite the king's slightly exposed position. Reactivating the queen now offers a fresh attacking angle, potentially pressuring black's defenses on the queenside. A curious repositioning of the queen, aiming to exploit the weakened dark squares around white's monarch while simultaneously vacating the b-file for potential rook activity. Shifting the knight to f3 subtly prepares for a kingside advance, aiming to exploit black's potentially overextended pawn structure and gain central influence. Seeking immediate tactical advantage by forcing piece exchanges often overlooks the underlying positional weaknesses it creates. Repositioning the rook to the 7th rank initiates a potent centralizing attack, aiming to exploit the exposed black king. Reinforcing the e-pawn's advance, this maneuver seeks to activate the queen and pressure white's queenside structure. Exchanging queens simplifies into a pawn-up endgame for white, but black's active rook must be carefully neutralized. Swapping queens simplifies to an endgame where black's doubled pawns on the file become a significant liability. Opening the g-file offers attacking prospects, but weakens your kingside structure significantly. This bishop's relocation ignites a desperate defense, seeking to disrupt white's looming pawn invasion. Securing the pawn and opening a decisive diagonal for your remaining pieces. Reclaiming the center with this pawn push offers a fighting chance in the rapidly simplifying position. Activating the rook down the open file leverages piece activity and attempts to exploit black's somewhat awkward pawn structure. Recapturing the knight on g7 is a tactical necessity, re-establishing material equality and preventing further white advances on the kingside. Reclaiming central influence, the knight aims to disrupt black's rook activity. Re-establishing pressure on the file is a reasonable defensive idea, though the king remains exposed. Capturing the pawn frees the rook to become an active piece on an open file. Forcing the king to a slightly less secure square with a check sets up potential future attacks on the enemy king's position. Securing the monarch becomes paramount, with the king venturing to a safer square. Activating the rook on the d-file opens possibilities for aggressive play, though it leaves the king somewhat exposed. Securing the king's safety before preparing a pawn push to exploit black's exposed monarch is paramount. Bringing the rook back into the fray reinforces the central pawn structure and prepares for further action on the king side. The knight's repositioning targets the vulnerable pawn chain and prepares for potential discoveries.